The stairwell smelled of concrete dust and the chemical attempt to mask it. Her heels made sounds she couldn't control, sharp reports that echoed upward and downward simultaneously, announcing her presence to anyone who might be listening. The break room was dark. She didn't turn on the lights. She found the wine in the cabinet above the sink, the same cabinet where Julian kept his ceramic mug, she realized, the one that required a key, the one she had never thought to question. The wine was cheap, leftover from a holiday party, something white that had been opened and recorked weeks ago. She poured it into a paper cup, the same cups that held the burnt coffee, and her hands were steady until they weren't. The tremor started in her left hand. She watched it with detached interest, the way one might observe a weather pattern on a distant coast. The wine sloshed, climbed the waxed paper, threatened to spill. She set the cup down. She pressed her palm flat against the counter, feeling the laminate surface, the slight give where water had warped the particle board beneath. Show, don't tell, she thought, hysterical and silent. Here is my hand shaking. Here is the evidence of realization. She picked up the cup with both hands. Drank. The wine was sour, oxidized, tasting of failure and time. She drank it anyway, all of it, standing in the dark break room where she had met Julian, where he had told her about burnt coffee and character, where he had first placed his hand on her shoulder and claimed her. She set the empty cup down. It fell over, rolled, came to rest against the sink. Maya walked back to the server room. Her hands were steady again. They were always steady. That was the problem. She found the pattern at 3:47 a.m. It was in the metadata, the information about the information, the digital fingerprints that most people never thought to examine. She had learned to examine them. Julian had taught her in those early months, when he was still playing the role of mentor, before he understood how completely she would absorb his lessons. Always check the logs, he had said, leaning over her shoulder in a different server room, a different late night. People lie. Systems don't. She had thought he was teaching her integrity. She understood now that he was teaching her his own methodology, how to build structures that would survive scrutiny, because they appeared to be exactly what they claimed to be. The logs showed the truth. The Meridian vendor portal had been accessed from the same IP address for every transaction. Not her IP, not the office network. A residential address in a suburb she recognized because Julian had mentioned it once, casually, complaining about his commute. The wife wanted the good school district, he had said, laughing, making himself accessible through the revelation of domestic inconvenience. His home IP, his personal laptop. The same device that appeared in the logs for Apex Solutions and Continuum Partners, the other two vendors she had streamlined in the past year. Maya sat back in the cold chair. The server room had settled into its nighttime rhythm, the fans adjusting to reduced load, the LEDs dimming slightly in power-saving mode. She was alone with machines that remembered everything and judged nothing. She thought about Julian's hand on her shoulder. The weight of it. The way he had always found reasons to touch her. Congratulation, guidance, the casual intimacy of power pretending to be friendship. She had cataloged these touches, she realized. Stored them, not as violations, she had been too hungry for that interpretation, but as data points. Evidence of her value. Proof that she was visible to the person who mattered. The server room's temperature control clicked, adjusting for the hour. The air grew colder. Maya didn't move. She thought about the celebration dinner, 6 months into her tenure. Julian had taken the team to a restaurant with white tablecloths, the kind of place where Maya had worried about using the wrong fork. He had toasted her. Our Maya, who sees what others miss. And the team had raised their glasses. And she had felt the warmth of belonging spread through her chest like something medical, something that required monitoring. The bill had gone on his corporate card. She had seen the receipt later, in an expense report she processed herself. His delegate, his trusted right hand. $847 for 4 people. She had calculated automatically the percentage of her monthly rent. She had filed the report without comment. That was her function. Now, in the server room, she calculated differently. The Meridian payments totaled $846,000 over 18 months. Apex, $1.2 million. Continuum, $623,000. She had authorized all of them. Her digital signature, her compliance, her architecture supporting a structure she hadn't known she was building. The realization didn't arrive as a thought. It arrived as a physical sensation, a loosening in her chest, as if something stitched there had finally torn through. She stood up. She walked to the server rack. She removed 3 more hard drives, methodically, the way she had learned to do everything. Precise, efficient, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking closely. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. She carried the drives to her bag, the one she had brought from her office. The one that contained her personal laptop, her notes, her personal budget 2024 spreadsheet that was actually a coded record of every transaction she had processed for Julian. She had started that spreadsheet 3 months ago without knowing why. Stress management, she had told herself. Tracking my impact. The codes had emerged organically, a private language she hadn't known she was developing until it was already fluent. The drives fit into the bag's padded compartment. She zipped it closed. The sound was loud in the server room, definitive. The sound of a door closing that she hadn't known was open. Maya walked to the terminal one last time. She opened a new document. She typed without thinking, her fingers finding language her conscious mind hadn't yet approved. The architecture was designed to fail. I was designed to fail with it. The question is whether failure is collapse or transformation. She saved the file to her personal cloud, encrypted, redundant, distributed across servers she had set up herself in the time she used to spend sleeping. Then she deleted it from the local machine. Then she wiped the terminal's temporary memory, the way Julian had taught her, the way she had learned to clean things without removing them. She stood in the server room for one more minute. The cold had settled into her bones, a familiar ache that she would carry with her now, she understood, into whatever came next. The machines hummed their indifferent song. The LEDs pulsed green and amber, the colors of go and caution, the colors of a system that continued to function regardless of who understood its purpose. Maya turned off the lights. The server room fell dark except for the equipment lights, the heartbeat continuing in blackness. She walked to the door. Her heels made no sound now. She had removed them without deciding to, carrying them in her left hand, her right hand on the door handle, her bag heavy with evidence against her shoulder. She paused. She listened to the hum. She thought about Julian, asleep in his good school district, his wife beside him, his hand perhaps resting on her shoulder in unconscious repetition of his daytime gestures. She thought about the audit, 30 days away. The moment when the structure she had built would be examined by people who hadn't learned to see what was there. She thought, I see what's there. The thought arrived without invitation. It sounded in her internal voice like the beginning of something rather than the end. Like the first true sentence she had spoken to herself in 3 years. Maya opened the door. The hallway was dark, emergency lit, empty. She walked through it in her stocking feet, carrying her shoes, carrying her architecture, carrying the cold of the server room in her shoulders and the warmth of something she couldn't yet name in her chest. She didn't know where she was going. She knew finally that she would be the one to decide. The milk steamer screamed like something wounded. Maya stood at the counter in the executive kitchen, watching the oat milk turn to foam, the sound drowning out the morning news playing on the wall-mounted screen. The anchor was discussing market futures. Green numbers scrolled across the bottom of the display, meaningless abstractions that determined whether the men on the 34th floor would smile or smash phones today. She had not slept. The hard drive sat in her apartment safe, 3 black rectangles that pulsed in her memory more vividly than any LED. She had driven home at 5 a.m., through light that was neither night nor day, past delivery trucks and joggers and the city's early risers who believed they were getting ahead of something. She had showered, changed, and returned by 7:15, her body performing normalcy while her mind continued to process in the background, a system that wouldn't shut down. The steamer finished its scream. She poured the foam into a paper cup, added 2 shots of espresso from the machine that required a code she had memorized without meaning to. Julian's birthday, backward. She had learned his birthday during her first month, filing his expense reports, noticing the dinner reservations, the gifts, the patterns of a personal life that seemed designed to be discovered. She carried the cup to his office. The hallway to Julian's corner suite smelled of carpet glue and ambition. The walls were lined with photographs of the company's history, groundbreakings, IPO celebrations, the CEO shaking hands with politicians whose names Maya had already forgotten. She walked past them without looking, her eyes on the carpet's geometric pattern, the way it repeated every 14 tiles, the way it was designed to move people forward without letting them notice where they were going. Julian's door was open. He was on the phone, his back to her, staring at the window that framed a view of the river she never had time to walk beside. She set the coffee on his desk, the ceramic mug, not a paper cup, his preference for permanence in a building designed for transients, and waited. No, the wife doesn't know, Julian was saying. His voice carried that particular register of performance, the intimacy he manufactured for phone calls the way others manufactured it for bedrooms. She thinks it's the investment property. Water damage, mold remediation. He laughed, a sound like gravel in water, the same laugh from 3 years ago, from the server room last night, from every moment when he believed he was winning. Right, exactly. Creative financing. Maya stood motionless. She had learned this posture, helpful, invisible, present without demanding presence. The assistant who becomes furniture. The analyst who becomes infrastructure. She had believed this was strategy. She understood now it was survival reflex, learned in childhood, perfected in corporate spaces that rewarded the ability to disappear while remaining useful. Julian hung up. He turned. His face shifted through several expressions in sequence. Surprise at her presence. Pleasure at the coffee, calculation of what she might have heard. Dismissal of the possibility that it mattered, Maya. He said her name the way he said everything, possessively as if he had invented it. "You're here early." I wanted to review the Q2 projections before the team meeting. Her voice was steady. "It was always steady. And I brought your coffee." Julian picked up the mug. Inhaled. The steam rose between them, a small cloud that temporarily obscured his face, and in that moment, Maya saw him clearly. The way his jaw tightened when he wasn't being watched. The way his shoulders dropped from their performance of confidence. The way he was smaller than he appeared in rooms where people needed to believe in something. "The projections," he said. "Right. I made some adjustments over the weekend. Historical corrections. You'll need to incorporate them. Historical corrections." The phrase landed in her chest like a stone dropped in still water. She thought of the hard drives in her safe. The metadata she had traced to his home IP. The $2.3 million in payments she had authorized without understanding. "I'll need the source documentation," she said. "For the audit trail." Julian sipped his coffee. His eyes held hers over the rim of the mug, dark and evaluating. "The documentation is sensitive. Pre-merger records. I'll handle the integration personally." "Of course," she smiled. She had practiced this smile in mirrors, in bathroom stalls between meetings, in the reflection of her laptop screen during video calls. The smile that said, "I am no threat. I am an extension of your competence." "Whatever you need, Julian." He set the mug down. His hand found her shoulder. The weight of it, familiar as her own heartbeat, pressing down through the thin wool of her blazer into the muscle beneath, into the memory of every other touch that had preceded it. "That's why you're indispensable. Maya, you understand the architecture." He squeezed, released. "The team meeting's at 10. I want you to present the vendor consolidation strategy. Julian presented that strategy last quarter, and now you'll present the implementation, my deputy, executing my vision." He was already turning back to his window, his river, his phone calls with people who didn't know what he was financing. "It's your moment, Maya. Don't make me regret giving it to you." She walked out with his coffee still warm in her hands, the ceramic mug he had forgotten to use, carrying it back to the kitchen to wash it, to perform the maintenance that kept his system functioning, to be the architecture that held his weight without complaining about the load. The team meeting was in Conference Room B, the one with the glass walls that made everyone visible and therefore careful. Maya arrived at 9:47, early enough to set up, late enough not to seem eager. She arranged her materials, her laptop, her notes, her water bottle with the label removed because Julian found branded bottles tacky, and waited for the room to fill. The team was 12 people who reported to Julian through various hierarchies that shifted quarterly. She knew their coffee orders, their children's names, their tells during presentations, who touched their face when lying, who laughed too loudly at the CEO's jokes, who had stopped making eye contact with her after the last promotion. She had cataloged them the way she cataloged everything, not out of interest, but out of necessity. The survival reflex of someone who had learned that power flows through information, and information flows through attention. Greg from compliance arrived first, his tie already loosened, his laptop covered in stickers from his children's school. He nodded at her without speaking, opened his machine, and began typing with the intensity of someone performing work they had already completed. Sarah from operations came next, smelling of the perfume she reapplied every 2 hours, the scent filling the room before her body did. She sat across from Maya, placed her phone face down on the table, a gesture of politeness that Maya recognized as theater. The phone's screen still glowing with notifications she would check the moment Julian looked away. The others filtered in. Maya watched them arrive through the reflection in her laptop screen, not turning her head, not seeming to observe. She had learned this from Julian, the power of apparent focus, the way people revealed themselves when they believed they were unobserved. Julian entered at 9:59. The room shifted. Chairs adjusted, screens closed, postures straightened. He walked to the head of the table without acknowledging anyone, sat, opened his leather portfolio, and looked at Maya. Begin. She stood. Her legs were steady. They were always steady. She connected her laptop to the display system, entered the code, waited for the screen to recognize her. The delay was 7 seconds. She counted them without seeming to, her face arranged in the expression of patient competence she had perfected. The screen resolved. Her presentation appeared. Slides she had built, data she had analyzed, a strategy Julian had described in a hallway 6 weeks ago, and she had transformed into something executable, something defensible, something that would appear in his annual review as evidence of his leadership. The vendor consolidation strategy, she began. As Julian outlined in Q1, we're targeting 15% cost reduction through strategic partnership rationalization. She clicked to the first slide. A graph showing projected savings, the line rising steadily across 12 months. The data was accurate. The projection was optimistic. The methodology was sound. Enough to survive scrutiny, but flexible enough to accommodate the adjustments Julian would inevitably request. Current state, 47. Active vendor relationships in the financial operations category. Target state, 12 strategic partnerships with tiered service agreements. Greg from compliance raised his hand. The audit implications? Fully documented. Maya clicked to the next slide, the compliance framework she had built specifically to answer this question. Every consolidation includes transition protocols, data retention schedules, and regulatory notification procedures. She did not look at Julian. She knew he was watching. She could feel it. The way you feel a window open in a closed room, the pressure change of attention directed at your back. She had learned to perform without his visible approval, to make his observation unnecessary by anticipating his desires. Questions? She asked the room. There were none. This was also familiar, the way Julian's presence preempted curiosity, the way people saved their objections for private conversations where they could be denied without witnesses. Excellent, Julian said. He stood, reclaiming the space she had briefly occupied. Maya will distribute the implementation timeline. I want Phase 1 complete by month end. He gathered his portfolio, his phone, his coffee cup that she had refilled during the presentation without him asking. Maya, walk with me. She carried the cup to his office. The hallway was the same. The carpet, the photographs, the geometric repetition. Maya walked beside Julian, half a step behind, close enough to hear him without seeming to listen. The compliance question, he said. Greg's getting nervous. The audit's in 28 days. I handled it. You handled the presentation. The underlying documentation is still... He paused at the elevator, pressed the button for the 34th floor. Sensitive. As we discussed, the elevator arrived. They entered. Maya watched the doors close, watched their reflection in polished steel, 2 people in similar suits, similar postures, similar expressions of professional containment. She looked like him. She had not noticed this before, or had noticed and dismissed it as inevitable. The way assistants begin to resemble their bosses, the way architecture absorbs the style of its architect. Meridian, Julian said. The word landed between them like a dropped object. The account you streamlined last year. It's flagged in the new audit protocols. Maya felt her pulse in her throat, a small animal trying to escape. She did not touch her neck. She did not change her breathing. I can review the documentation. Ensure it's complete. The documentation is fine. The account itself? The elevator stopped at 23. Picked up a man from legal who nodded at Julian and did not speak. Julian waited for the doors to close. Continued in the same tone as if discussing weather. The account needs to disappear from the active systems. Not deleted, archived, inaccessible to standard audit queries. That's a technical procedure. IT would need to... It does what we tell them. And we don't tell them everything. The elevator reached 34. Julian stepped out, turned, held the door with his hand. You're the only one who understands the architecture, Maya. The only one I trust to build what's needed. He released the door. It closed between them, his face disappearing in the narrowing gap. The last thing visible, his smile. The same smile from the break room 3 years ago, from the server room last night, from every moment when he needed her to believe that trust was a gift, rather than a mechanism. Maya stood in the elevator. The legal man had exited at 30. She was alone with the smell of Julian's cologne, the cedar and vetiver scent that lingered in enclosed spaces, that she would later associate with the moment she understood her function completely. The doors opened at 14. She did not exit. She pressed the button for the basement, for the server room, for the cold and the ozone and the machines that remembered everything without judging. The server room was 62 degrees. She did not need to check the thermostat. She knew. Maya sat at the terminal she had used last night, the same chair, the same cold through her blouse. She opened her Personal Budget 2024 spreadsheet, the coded record she had maintained without understanding why, the private language that had emerged from her need to track what she could not yet name. She added a new entry. Not a transaction this time. A timeline, day 1, the realization. The hard drives. The metadata, day 2, the coffee run. The request. The trust that is not trust. She stared at the screen. The cursor blinked, waiting for the next entry, the next code, the next piece of information that would make the pattern visible. She thought about Julian's hand on her shoulder. The weight of it. The way it had become familiar enough to ignore, intimate enough to dismiss, constant enough to shape her. She thought about the presentation she had just given. Her strategy. His vision. The way the room had looked at him when she finished. The way they had seen his deputy executing his leadership. The way her competence had become evidence of his judgment. Her hands were on the keyboard. They were steady. They were always steady, she typed. The architecture is designed to make me responsible for what he controls. To make me visible in my labor and invisible in my agency. To make me the material that holds his shape. She saved the file. Closed it. Sat in the cold and the hum and the smell of ozone until her phone buzzed. A text from Julian, not an email, not a call. The intimacy of direct messaging. Dinner tonight. The usual place. We need to discuss the archive strategy. She did not respond immediately. She watched the screen until it dimmed, until the server room's power management recognized inactivity and began its slow reduction of resources, the mechanical equivalent of losing interest. The usual place. A restaurant with white tablecloths where she had worried about using the wrong fork. Where he had toasted her. Where the bill had gone on his corporate card, and she had calculated the percentage of her rent. She typed her response. I'll be there. Then deleted it. Typed, of course, what time? The version that asked for information rather than confirming availability, the small assertion of boundaries that he would not notice, but she would remember. He replied, 8. Don't be late. The wife's out of town. We have the evening to get this right. Maya stood. The chair rolled back, did not hit anything this time, her movements controlled now, deliberate, the physical expression of a decision she had not yet articulated to herself. She walked to the server rack. Rack 7. She did not open it. She placed her hand on the latch, feeling the metal cold through her palm, the vibration of disks spinning in their bays, the heartbeat of a system that continued to function regardless of who understood its purpose. 28 days, she thought. The audit. The moment when the structure will be examined by people who haven't learned to see what is there. She removed her hand from the latch. She would not take more drives today. She would not make copies, create redundancies, build the evidence trail that her survival reflex demanded. Today she would observe. Tonight she would listen. She would let Julian explain the archive strategy, let him describe the architecture he needed her to build. Let him believe that she was still the material that could be poured into any mold he designed, and she would remember. Every word, every touch, every moment when his need for her became visible in its desperation. She walked out of the server room. The hallway was warm, the temperature rising as she moved away from the machines, back toward the spaces where humans pretended to be comfortable. She stopped at the break room. The coffee machine gurgled, spat, produced its burnt offering. She did not pour a cup. She stood and watched the steam rise, the small cloud that obscured whatever stood behind it, and thought about the difference between seeing what was there and seeing what you needed to believe. Julian needed to believe she was loyal. The company needed to believe the audit would pass. She needed to believe there was a version of this story where she was not the architecture, but the architect. The steam dissipated. The break room was empty, the parking garage visible through the window, the cars arriving with people who still believed that early mornings and burnt coffee would build the character necessary for success. Maya walked to her office. She sat at her desk. She opened her laptop and began to work. On the archive strategy, not yet, but on the timeline, the documentation, the careful record of every interaction that had brought her to this moment when she finally understood that the only way to survive the architecture was to become the one who designed its demolition. Her hands were steady on the keyboard. They were always steady. That was no longer the problem. The bar smelled of citrus and desperation. Maya stood near the window, holding a glass of wine she hadn't chosen, watching condensation form on the stem and drip onto her thumb. The happy hour crowd filled the space between her and the exit. Junior analysts in wrinkled shirts. Senior managers in jackets they removed immediately. The collective performance of relaxation that required more effort than work itself. She had arrived at 6:15. Early enough to observe, late enough not to seem eager. Julian had specified 6:30, after the market closes, as if the market's closing determined anything about their meeting. She had used the 15 minutes to select a position with sightlines to the door, the bar, the hallway to the restrooms. She had learned this from him, she realized. The constant calculation of vulnerability and advantage. The way survival required knowing where threats might enter. The wine was too cold, chilled to the point of tastelessness. A Sauvignon Blanc with a label designed to suggest sophistication without requiring it. She let it warm in her hand, feeling the glass transition from refrigerator cold to room temperature, the small physical evidence of time passing. Julian arrived at 6:47. She noted the delay, 17 minutes, not enough to seem intentional, enough to establish that his time controlled the rhythm. He entered with his phone to his ear, performing busyness, performing importance, performing the role that required her to wait. She did not approach. She waited for him to find her, to scan the room and locate her presence as a fact already known, already incorporated into his evening's architecture. His eyes found hers. He smiled, the smile that reached his mouth before his eyes, the smile she had learned to read as calculation rather than warmth. He ended his call, crossed the room, placed his hand on her elbow. "Maya, you came." "I was invited." The hand on her elbow tightened, a small correction. "I needed someone I could trust." "The archive strategy?" He paused, noticing someone across the room, a VP from risk management whose name Maya had forgotten. Julian's face shifted, became public, became the version of himself that required witnesses. "We'll discuss after. First we celebrate." "Celebrate?" "The Golden Project." He said it as if she should know, as if information flowed to her through channels she hadn't been monitoring. "CEO announced this afternoon. Systems overhaul, succession implications. I volunteered to lead." He was watching the VP, not her, his attention already dividing between the conversation he was having and the conversation he was preparing to have. "I recommended you as my deputy." The room applauded. Maya felt the wine in her hand, suddenly heavy, suddenly significant. She thought of the server room, the hard drives, the metadata that traced to his home. She thought of the archive strategy he wanted to discuss, the disappearing of accounts, the architecture of concealment he needed her to build. "Thank you," she said. The words automatic, the response learned, the performance of gratitude for an opportunity she had not requested. Julian's attention returned to her, full and sudden, the way a searchlight finds a target. "Don't thank me yet." The project's visibility is significant. Success means promotion. Failure means he didn't finish. He didn't need to. She understood the structure he was describing. His success built on her labor. His failure transferred to her documentation, her signatures, her invisible architecture. "Julian." The voice came from behind them, from the door, from a frequency that made Julian's hand drop from her elbow as if the contact had burned. The wife. Celine was taller than Maya expected. This was her first observation, the way the mind records physical facts when emotional information arrives too quickly to process. Taller, blonde, wearing a coat that cost more than Maya's monthly rent, the kind of coat that required dry cleaning and insurance, and the confidence that dry cleaning and insurance were automatic concerns. She had seen photographs, of course. The company newsletter, the holiday party coverage, the framed image on Julian's desk that showed a family at a ski resort, everyone smiling with the intensity of people who had paid for the experience of happiness. But photographs compressed people, reduced them to single expressions, single moments, single interpretations. In motion, Celine occupied space differently. She moved through the happy hour crowd without acknowledging it, her path clearing as if by magnetic repulsion, her focus narrow and specific and entirely on Julian. "You're not answering your phone," Celine said. Not to Maya, never to Maya. The absence of acknowledgement was itself a communication, a statement about who existed in the space and who was furniture, infrastructure, architecture, the market. Julian began. The market closed at 4. Our anniversary dinner was at 7. It's now... Celine checked her watch, a gesture of precision that matched her appearance, everything about her designed to demonstrate control. 7:23. The reservation is cancelled. The sommelier I requested specifically is serving other people. And you are here. She looked at Maya finally, the look a person gives a stain on a carpet, Something to be addressed after the larger problem is managed. With her. The Golden Project, Julian said. His voice had shifted, become smaller, become the version of himself that Maya had glimpsed in the elevator, the man without the performance. CEO announced today. You had to what? Volunteer for more absence? More late nights at the office? Celine's voice carried the quotation marks, the specific weight of phrases that had been used before, that had accumulated meaning through repetition. More stress about money that you don't explain? More investment strategies that require you to be unreachable? The bar had gone quiet around them. Not silent. Conversations continued, glasses clinked. The mechanical systems of social life maintained their function. But the attention had shifted, the way a room always shifts when private conflict becomes public theater. Maya stood motionless. She understood her position in this geometry. The evidence of Julian's absence, the proof of Celine's suspicions, the object that made the argument concrete. She thought of moving, of finding an exit, of becoming invisible in the way she had trained herself to become invisible. But Julian's hand found her wrist, pressing down, holding her in place. Celine, this is Maya, my deputy. We're discussing the project. Nothing. Celine laughed, a sound without humor, a mechanical response to a word that had lost its meaning through overuse. That's what you always say, nothing, just work. Just the architecture. Just the building that will fall down if you stop holding it up. She looked at Maya directly, for the first time, the look of a person examining damage they hadn't expected to find. Do you know what he says about you? Maya felt the pressure on her wrist. Julian's fingers, pressing bone against bone. The small pain of warning. He says you're indispensable, Celine continued. The only one who understands. The only one he can trust. She smiled, the same smile as Julian's, the mouth before the eyes. I used to be indispensable. I used to be the only one. Do you know when that changed? Maya did not answer. She understood that no answer was required, that the question was rhetorical in the way that accusations are rhetorical, designed to establish truth rather than discover it. 18 months ago, Celine said, the same time he started coming home smelling of that cedar cologne he only wears for important meetings. The same time he stopped explaining where the money went. The same time she stopped. Her face shifted, the performance cracking, something vulnerable visible beneath the precision. The same time I stopped believing him, Julian released Maya's wrist. He stepped toward his wife, his hands raised in the gesture of surrender that men learn to use when they have no other strategy. Celine, please, not here. Not now. Then when? The anniversary you forgot? The dinner you missed? Celine's voice caught, a small break in the machinery, quickly repaired. I'm going to my mother's, don't call. Don't explain. I've heard every explanation. She turned, the coat swirling around her legs, the movement practiced, cinematic, the exit of a woman who had performed this departure before. The bar exhaled. Conversations resumed, louder than before, as if to demonstrate that they had never stopped, had never been interested, had never witnessed anything that might require acknowledgement. Julian stood motionless. His face was blank, the expression of a system that had encountered an error it hadn't been programmed to handle. Then he turned to Maya, and his face changed, became familiar again, became the face that knew how to use whatever material was available. She's paranoid, he said. Thinks I'm cheating. Maya looked at him. She thought of the hard drives in her safe. The metadata. The payments to Meridian Consulting that matched the timeline Celine had just described. 18 months. The same duration. The same architecture. You're not, though, Maya said. Not a question. A statement that required confirmation, that created the space for Julian to lie. His face showed relief, the micro-expression she had learned to identify, the relaxation of muscles that held tension only when truth was possible. Of course not, he said. You know me, Maya. You know what matters to me, she did.